Welcome to another episode of the School Podcast. On this episode, we have Wayne Norrie, CEO of the Greenwood Academies Trust. In this episode, we cover everything in education, so it's a must listen. With that said, a massive shout out to Gadget. Without you, none of this would be possible. They create world-class videos and pictures for schools, so get in touch. Also, dreams to reality. What we do is run high-end programs focused on mindset and motivation, academic performance, well-being. We have a wide range of different speakers delivering impact every single day. So check out Gadget, check out Dreams to Reality. Wayne Norrie, let's get into the episode. Welcome to another episode of the School Podcast. Today, we are in Corby with a very good friend of mine. Are we friends now?
We're friends, Cameron. We can say that.
Communicating for a long time, we can say that. Wayne Norrie, how are we?
I'm great. It's great to welcome to Hazel East Primary School.
Thank you. So, amazing school here, by the way. Everything, this is incredible. Before we talk about this school and your other schools, who is Wayne?
Oh, well, I'm very fortunate to be the CEO of Greenwood Academies Trust. So we're a family of 37 schools. Really passionate about the communities that we serve. We serve underserved communities. Some people say disadvantaged. I prefer to use the word underserved.
We'll touch on that. Interesting. 37 schools?
37 schools, yeah, spread across from junction 28 of the M1 to Mansfield down to junction 14 Northamptonshire, and the pleasure of working on the East Coast in Lincolnshire, Skegness.
Okay, where are you from?
Bulwell, Nottingham.
Nottingham.
So we've got 5 schools in Nottingham, and I was a child on free school meals. Couldn't read or write when I was 11 and went on to fail all my GCSEs quite spectacularly at the age of 16.
So how do you go from failing your GCSEs to then being a CEO of a trust of 37 schools?
A lot of luck about being in the right place at the right time. My dad was very adamant that I either went back to school and did qualifications or got a job. So I was a rather cocky 16-year-old.
Got you.
And he got me a job as a hod carrier, carrying bricks up a ladder on a building site.
Okay.
I lasted 3 days and begged him to send me back to school.
Really?
Yeah, so quite a wise move.
That's quite interesting, actually, because I think there's quite a lot of teenagers I work with, especially boys in particular, who experienced that. There was one boy, I can't remember what school I was in, but he said he did work experience in year 10 as a builder, and he absolutely hated it. Before that, he was like, I'll just be a builder, I'll do this, do that, everyone else does it. He hated it. Then in year 11, he literally turned it around because he wasn't inspired by the amazing good stuff. He was inspired by what he didn't want to do. But so that's funny that you actually say that.
And it's the fact that I wasn't fit enough to do it. So I used to crawl home. And I thought, I can't do this for the rest of my life because I'll never have a life.
Or back.
Yeah, if I was fitter, I'd have been better at it, I think.
So what happened then? So you went back to school?
Yeah, I went back to school and worked really, really hard at getting qualifications. And that was really interesting because I will say to the kids in our trust, it's not the end of the world if you don't get qualifications, but you miss out on that really exciting teenage time when all your mates are out and doing things and you're stuck in college still, and have all of that reset. So it isn't the end of the world, but I could have had a better time. And I then fell into teaching as a career because I did the college I went to, we did community service on a Wednesday afternoon. So you could either go into a primary school or into an old people's home and help. I chose a primary school and just absolutely fell in love with it, just got bitten by the bug. And that gave me the motivation to carry on and to do A-levels and then eventually to do my teacher training.
So when you became a teacher, was it primary schools you were working in?
Primary school, yeah. My first class was in Lincolnshire with a class of year 5 children.
Wow.
Yeah, I still remember quite a lot of the names. I said to our ECTs this year, you'll remember your first class forever.
Do you?
And it went full circle because I did some work for Ofsted. I was a senior HMI at one point for a very short space in my career. And I went to inspect school in Lincolnshire and the receptionist was a girl I taught.
Wow.
I still remembered her. And it's just magical. And especially being a primary school teacher because you spend all day with the same group of kids for a year.
Yeah.
It's a really unique bond.
Obviously, majority of my work is in secondary school, so you don't really consider that. I've got children in primary school now, but the fact that what you just said, it is a different bond, isn't it?
And you spend more of their waking hours in the week than you do with your parents. And it is a really interesting bond. But what I love about our trust is that I get to work. So this morning I've been with sixth formers just up the road, and then this afternoon I've been in nursery. And so that breadth of going from talking to 3-year-olds to 19-year-olds in the same day, in the same job, what the job would give you that?
And I've known you for a while, and I've seen you in previous schools, a few schools close to here, but even just talking to you for the last hour whilst Dave was setting up, you want to be out there, you want to be communicating with the children, you're not just hid in your office. Why is that important to you? It's really, because you could probably go missing for a couple of days and nobody would know.
I work with such an amazing team, I could go missing for probably a month before anyone would care. But for me, when you work at scale, 37 schools, it's really hard sometimes to spread an ethos and values driven without you being in the building, and to pick up from key stakeholders, to listen to the issues on the ground, because you can very quickly become out of touch. And to remember, we've got a saying across our trust is about every child, every academy, every day, and listening to what the kids are saying to me is vitally important, because I think you could lose touch easily. I could spend 5 days a week in an office, I could find work to do, but that isn't what I came into education for.
Say that line again. Every day.
Every child, every academy, every day. And the focus is, so people say, why do you say child when they're kind of, key stage 3 and key stage 4? And actually, it's really important to remember that they are emerging into young adults. But what we want the focus on this trust to be is on every individual, in every academy, every day, and it's really important. And that drives our We Are Gap principles.
Was this your first CEO role?
Yes, it was.
And did you create the trust, or did you come into the trust?
No, I came into the trust. So I was a senior HMI for Ofsted.
Okay.
And we inspected a couple of the trust schools. And the previous CEO wanted me to come and work for the trust, and initially I was like, no, I'm really happy where I am. But then I thought, because there's something very unique about a trust that serves underserved communities, and we take schools that have lost their way. So I don't want to say we take schools in special measures or a category, they've just lost their way. And working with schools that have lost their way is fascinating. And I was here for 6 months, and then the CEO decided that he was going to retire. And by then I was so invested in what we wanted to achieve that I stayed on. But I have learnt a huge amount in the 8 years.
8 years. What would you say is one of the biggest things you've learnt?
The biggest thing that I've learnt in this is a saying that goes back from my granny. So my granny was from Scotland, my dad's Scottish, and she said that God's given you 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. And that kind of lots of listening. So I spend a lot of time listening and processing. And I think that when I first came into the trust, I was very set on making a mark and, being somebody. But the value of listening now, and that's another reason I spend so much time in schools, is to listen to a range of people.
It's interesting because I see what you're like behind the camera. And as I said before, when we go places, I watch everything, and you truly do listen. When you ask a question, you truly do listen. And it is the same for people like when John Murphy came and we done the podcast, just phenomenal listeners. And it's not just a conversation, there is layers to it. So I have to totally agree. Quickly though, as a CEO, because you're all about the communities you serve, you're all about like helping and providing a future for so many children, really. What is something quite difficult about your job what nobody ever sees?
I think the weight of responsibility.
Okay.
I never switch off.
Never.
It's even when I'm away on holiday, I should be looking at my emails. And I think because the most important thing we can do for our 19,000 children and young people is to keep them safe. And we know that the world have got a lot of challenges. And I think that kind of weight of responsibility, because if you want to take something seriously, and not just your children, it's also about the people that work with you, because we're only as good as the people who work with our children. You can have the ethos, you can have the plans, you can have everything. And I feel so responsible for everybody that I find it really hard to switch off. And that's the biggest thing. I also think it's really hard sometimes because everyone thinks you've got the answers. And when you develop distributed leadership, sometimes people, a really funny story, a colleague was our chief education officer, and he's been promoted to be a CEO. And he said to me, when he was a CEO for about 3 or 4 months, why does everybody ring you at 7 o'clock and dump a problem on you at night, particularly on a Friday? And I'll say, go through your call history to me and see what time you used to ring me. And I think there's nobody to turn to. And I got this little saying, I'm waiting for the grown-ups to arrive some days.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And that's that weight of expectation. And I don't want to get this wrong.
CEOs get a lot of bad names, like bad rap or whatever it's called. How does that make you feel? They're CEOs at the top, they take all this money, they don't know what it's like, and the list of things can really go on. And for somebody like yourself who truly cares, who's truly out there, that must hurt sometimes. But then you probably do know some CEOs who might just be in the office all the time. What's your kind of take on that whole perspective of what people say?
I think it's inevitable, isn't it, that people will always say, well, he or she earns X, or they don't do anything, or they... And I think at the end of the day, it's about who we're serving. So actually, I'm here to serve my kids, their families and those communities. And if you can hand on heart say that you're doing that job, people will necessarily pay you what they think it's worth. I think, as in every walk of life, there are people that might take advantage of a position,
of course,
might not. But I think that the great thing about education, and it is the great thing about education, is everybody's got a bit of an understanding and an opinion on education because everybody's been through it.
Yeah, it's true.
And that lived experience that they've had will colour your life. So, for example, my dad, his lived experience of school was really poor. And when I was head teacher of my first school, he wouldn't come into the school to drop something off one day because he didn't want to come into the school.
Wow.
And I think that that's really powerful. So everybody's got a view of education, therefore they may not have a hospital if they've never been in, or, And I think that basically we are publicly accountable figures and we are accountable to the public. And if we're not doing a great job, then that needs to be called out. But there are thousands of, probably not thousands, hundreds of CEOs across the country, and 99% of them will be doing a great job, will not be on the big salaries, will not be on there. 1% will be, and that, and they're obviously doing a great job as well.
Yeah, interesting. What's one of the, do you have a certain philosophy, if you've taken over a school or taken on a school which is currently struggling, or do you have a philosophy, or your trust has a philosophy, what you're really you have to implement on day one, or
depending on if the school's lost its way, then we do have a kind of a formula that will work with the school. We don't have a one-size-fits-all school model.
Interesting.
And that's really important to me.
So that was very popular at one point with many trusts.
Very popular. And when I first took over the trust, I was encouraged very strongly by the Department for Education to put a one-size-fits-all model in.
Why can't you have a one-size-fits-all?
I think you can if that's your philosophy and that's your belief. But my belief is that our schools are community schools. So if I was to take you to here, for example, so we're sitting at Hazel Lees, you and I could have a walk around the corner to Kingswood Primary. They serve different children in Corby because they serve different catchments. So our expectations are one size, so we have the same expectations for all of our children, but the delivery model is different. And the way we describe it is that the destination's the same, but you might go by train, by car, by bus, so the way in which you reach that destination. My overriding passion is that I have to be able to have my own children educated in all of our schools, because if it seriously isn't what I would aspire, some people say if it isn't good enough, no. If it's not what I aspire for my own children, it shouldn't be what I aspire for anybody's children. And so we work very much on that. So you will see, as you walk around the Gadget Academy, you will see things that are consistent. Our 9 principles of good teaching. But what you will see is a curriculum that's bespoke to this community. So we're sitting in Hazel Lees. Beverly knows this community and school much better than I do. And we trust her professional opinion. And I think part of the issue is sometimes when you do a one-size-fits-all, and our trust did a one-size-fits-all, and we didn't get the results from that, it's about accountability and responsibility. So I can only truly hold somebody to account for things they're responsible for. And if you're not responsible for implementing your own way of doing it, how can I hold you accountable?
Right. So you said you used to be a one-size-fits-all?
Before my time.
Before your time?
Yeah.
How do you how do you allow a school to have its own kind of autonomy and build its own culture? And yeah, it's still it's you guys, it's your values, but like how do you allow a school to have that freedom?
Firstly, we do an awful lot of work with the schools, and we do an awful lot. So you will see that our badge is very interesting. So we have a GAT badge, and what we do with schools is the GAT badge goes around the school badge.
Yeah.
So we are essentially around them, supporting them. We do a number of range of quality assurance. You know, we work with schools to develop. We do a lot of developmental work. So we have practitioner-led groups across the trust. And the way that we do, I call it actually consensual alignment. So we get a group of great people in a room and they'll all steal ideas from each other, and actually it becomes alignment, because actually why wouldn't you want to be great? It's by appointing a principal and not a head of academy. So we're really clear. So we don't gag pull, for example. So our principals run every part of their own school. Now that's a model that works for us, but in a
what does that mean? Finances?
They're in charge of their finances, they're in charge of their recruitment, they're in charge of everything. We of course monitor the finance, we take a top slice or partnership fee, but it is a top slice, you know, we take money away from the school to provide services. But I've got a friend of mine who's very high up in a supermarket chain, and he very proudly says you can walk into this supermarket chain in Derby or Daventry or Devon or anywhere else with D, and all the beans are on aisle 8, and that works in a supermarket brand. And I think some mats are supermarket mats, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. We're more kind of a happy shopper kind of mat, you know, where we get economies of scale, but you're free to do your own stuff. Doesn't mean we don't intervene. Yeah. Doesn't mean if we think a principal is taking the school down the wrong way. So I have, there are 3 basic sayings. I've only got 3 jobs to do as the CEO. One's to stand in front of the academy and the staff and protect it when it needs protecting. One is to stand beside them and support them, and one is to get behind them and kick them up the backside when things aren't right. And that's my job. And thankfully I do more of the support than the protect or the kick.
Yeah, because there's a lot of conversation around children first, teachers first, isn't there, in education? And it's kind of like we were talking about on the way here, it's a bit kind of like chicken and egg, really. Like, what's your kind of like philosophy on like this conversation around, children have to be at the front of everything, or teachers need to be at the front of everything?
In order for children to thrive, I need the adults around them to thrive.
Okay. And
it's about meeting the vast array of needs that are in the classroom. So what we would always say is it's an equal partnership, because my children can't be happy without my teachers. And actually our teachers don't thrive if our children aren't happy. So it's about, but we also understand that my children would think I was the best dad in the world if I just fed them McDonald's every day and I let them play on their PlayStation for the rest. And actually we need to set boundaries for children sometimes, and I think that's really important. So I think it's about, one of our aims at the Trust is that children thrive and they leave us equipped to lead happy and successful lives in whatever they choose to be. And how do you get a thriving community? Everybody in there needs to thrive. Parents, every member of our team. So whether you come into contact with our children for an hour at midday, or whether you're a teacher and you're with them for all day, we've got to ensure that you're thriving, because it's hard work. And some of the schools that we work in are challenging places. Yeah. With very complex children who live very complex lives, who are amazing. I always say 100% of our children are fabulous. 2 or 3% sometimes make the wrong choice. And it's about supporting those 2 or 3%. But there are easier places, and people don't like me saying this, there are easier schools to work at than our schools. There are easier places to earn your money.
I mean, I've been in quite a few of your schools. But there is that level of consistency across the board as far as everything I see with the teachers and the students. And I won't mention it for the sake of the camera, but the one school I said earlier, the community of one of your schools is extremely difficult, but you would never know being in the school. So to me, that's a sign of a great school. You know, you sometimes forget about the challenges which is happening outside the gate, because when they come in, it's a safe space and it's thriving, which is amazing.
And it's very much like, you know, the old saying about the swan, kind of, it's a swan-like and we're paddling like mad, just to keep that going. But this trust is only ever going to be as good as the people that are part of it. And we will never be better than the people who are part of it. And I'm really lucky that I have the best people working with us.
But you said that earlier when the cameras wasn't on. I said, come on, Wayne, you have to say that. And you're like, no, honestly.
It is. And if I'd have had the people that are with me now 4 or 5 years ago, we would have accelerated this more quickly.
Yeah, but then you would have also been a different CEO 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah.
So I think it's about progress, isn't it, I think?
I'm a very CEO to the one I was 3 weeks ago.
Yeah.
You know, that constant reflection. So every conversation we have, we reflect upon every time I go into a school. So today, you know, here, I've taken an hour and a half of Beverly's time, and that's got to mean something, you know, because otherwise I've wasted her time, and her time's too precious. And it's a really interesting job, and I've been asked to mentor some new CEOs, which is really nice. But I'm still learning this job. I'm 8 years in, I'm learning, and it's fascinating.
So you just said about taking Beverly's time, hour and a half, which is really, obviously really, really important. So there's obviously another conversation around like the loads of executive principals and heads who potentially not have ever been a head or whatever it might be. And I've been in many schools where I know the head teachers, and they say there's a lot of pressure, and they say they would never be able to run this school. What's your kind of take on that? Do you have like a philosophy around that? Because sometimes, obviously I don't know the ins and outs, I'm only taking what I hear, but it's like a lot of the executive principals and whatever on the roads, they come in school, take the time off of the head, never really provide anything, and they're justified now. They've done what they're supposed to do, but then they go home and all the pressure's on the head teacher. What's your kind of thoughts on that? I just want to take a quick moment to thank one of our school podcast sponsors, Access Education. The guys at Access Education are on a mission to give every school the freedom to put education first. And they do this by bringing all your software needs into one place. Whether it is financial management, HR, payroll, parent communication, or classroom content and assessments, they have you covered. They work with over 9,000 maintained schools, academies, MATs, and independent schools across the UK. On another note, I've personally worked with Access Education for a number of years. The team, the work they're doing is unbelievable. So hit all the links in the bio, check them out, and let's get back to this podcast.
So everybody's accountable for everybody in our trust.
Okay.
So it's no good any head teacher, any executive head teacher said, you know what, Hazel Lees is doing brilliantly, but you know Skegness Juniors isn't, because they're all our children and they all deserve that. We're very focused on who does what. I genuinely believe you can be the CEO of a trust without a teaching background. I genuinely believe that.
Yeah, I believe that too.
I think it's really hard to judge a head teacher if you've not done their job. And had that.
Say that again.
I think it's hard to judge a head teacher, to be an executive head, or to be an Ofsted inspector. And this is really controversial in some quarters if you've never been the head teacher for school, because the head teacher's job is very unique and very special.
Wow.
And I think that support you give a head at that executive head level. So, for example, all of our directors of education, we don't have executive heads.
I don't really know what to call them.
No, it depends. Some places do, but we're very keen that they are the principal of their own school. I don't like the word principal, I inherited it, I'd rather say head. They are the heads of their own school.
I'm confused, I do, Wayne.
Oh, and he's got so many titles. Our directors of education line manage the heads.
Okay.
And that's a line manager relationship, and we're very clear. So at the start of every year, we say, what do you think your priorities are? We think your priorities might be this, and we have a conversation together. And I think that idea of that everybody needs somebody to turn to, and it's great to pick up the phone to someone who's been ahead and said, how would you have handled this? But at Beverly's time, it's really interesting because I get the most unique job, because what I do is I walk around the schools and I see our children, I talk to them, and I'm constantly looking. And I joined the trust. When I joined the trust, we visited a school that had lost its way. And I had another colleague in the trust with me who did a finance function. And they came out with me, and I was walking around the school and I was saying to the head all these things. And he came out, he says to me, oh wow, you must have a checklist of what you look for. I don't go into school to look for things, I see things.
Ooh.
And that's a very different concept.
Why? Explain that again.
So you can go into a school and you could have a checklist. So for example,
So maybe controversial again, but sometimes I feel like Ofsted go into schools.
Possibly they have a framework, which is a form of a checklist.
Yeah, I guess.
And I've seen some colleagues recently, not in our organisation, but in others, who judge a lesson by how many times have you used this technique, this technique.
Why is that damaging?
Teaching's a relationship, and teaching is a lesson that can flow differently. And you know, there is a place in the world for slant, there is a place in the world for direct questioning, there is a place in the world for there, but you need to have a teacher that's got a toolbox. So I think teaching leadership is a toolbox. And I think when people talk about a leadership style, have you ever read the book Sixteen a Sid?
I want to make you feel comfortable and say yes, but no, I haven't.
Okay, Sixteen a Sid is a great book. And it's about a cat who lives in 6 different houses on the same street. And he behaves in 6 different ways in these 6 different houses to get his dinner. And I think that's about leadership, isn't it? Because actually I need to be a different leader in this situation with this person there. And I think that's the beauty of the model of around how you can do that. So I see things in schools which prompt me to question. So rather than do the tick list, and the seeing is important. And this is where you need a really good understanding of school improvement.
I don't look for things, I see them. I really like that. What can people take from that? I feel like we can all take something from that, even in our own personal lives.
I think what's really hard as well is...
That's quite spiritual, that is, Wayne.
Occasionally I can be. It's not to be rigid in our thinking, and actually understand it's about different viewpoints, and it's a snapshot in time. So you walk round, as any judgment is about anything you make, you know, you make your mind up about people very quickly, don't you? You know, subconsciously or consciously sometimes. And I think the idea is that if you go in with a checklist, it's almost like a preconceived idea. If you go in and suck up the atmosphere of a school, and I used to work in Sheffield with schools that had lost their way. One of the best jobs I've ever had. This is the best. That was one of the best. And you could almost smell a school that had lost its way. There was almost like a smell, like a feeling. And I think your gut tells you. It's fascinating, isn't it? Because, you know, you talk about gut reactions. I once worked with somebody who was trained to be a doctor. And we were talking about gut reactions. And he said, there's no such thing as a gut reaction. Your brain is telling you you've been here before. You just don't know you've been here before. And he had this image of, that's why you get the feeling. But I think when we talk about teaching...
I like the gut stuff, is true.
Yeah, because you get that innate feeling. And I think...
That's also experience, I think it comes from. Yeah, what he's pretty much saying.
And always thinking about the third conversation down the road.
They say, what do they say? They say your head will lie to you, your heart is an idiot, but your gut will never lie.
I like that, yeah.
That's a new tattoo there, Wayne.
Yeah, I can have one. My first
Live, laugh,
tattoo,
love.
I think I'm going to have Greenwood on my back. That would be like a nice crest. But I think sometimes we forget, don't we, or that everything is about relationships. So I talk about if you've got 90% knowledge and 10% personality, people don't want to know your 90% knowledge. And I think in terms of when we talk about behaviour management, it's not management, it's relationships.
But I think you have to define what that relationship is. So going back to like what you said earlier, you said you would be the best dad in the world if you fed your children McDonald's all the time.
In their eyes.
So the truth is, in their eyes, so the truth is, you're not trying to be their friend because they're always going to have friends, but they're only going to have one dad. So it's your job to instill what they need to be successful or resilient or kind and everything in life.
Kids like boundaries, don't they?
So what is that relationship element like? What does that relationship look like?
I think it's about setting out the stall, about kids like boundaries. Kids like to actually know. They pretend they don't, but we all like to know the box in which we manoeuvre in. And to manoeuvre within that box is absolutely fine. It's when you manoeuvre out of that box that you've got issues. And it's about non-conformity. And that's when we have problems. So let's think about the behaviour is, my expectations are X, Y, Z. I will help you live up to those expectations because everybody has to have expectations. Yeah. There has to be rules. But I think it's about the relationship and the way that you build them. And, you know, and we hear some really interesting stories of behaviour policies that are really punitive and, you know, and why would you get yourself into a corner? I remember the first head I ever worked...
What do you mean punitive? What
so very kind of, you know, so we're chasing kids around because their hair isn't tied up. There are certain lessons for health and safety, but does it really matter, that kind of
Especially
stuff?
when we don't have hair, right?
Well, funny enough today, a lot of the kids in reception said, my granddad's bald just like you. I don't mind the bald, it's calling me granddad. That really upset me today. But I think it's about kind of picking your battles and what matters. The first head I worked for said to me, never get into confrontation with these kids because that's their life and they're much better at it than you. And it's about, why would we want to get into confrontation? And it's so, but you
can't avoid that though, can you?
You need a level of order about it, don't you? And you need a level of respect. And I think our schools have become much more successful due to stability of people in those schools. So the longevity of where kids crave stability, adults actually crave stability. Exciting bits, but the stability that's there.
Only if you're in control, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that stability is really important. And I think it comes with time. And I also think it comes from expectations. Look, it's really easy in my job when things are going great to stick to my values, stick to my principles. It's when things aren't going great to stick to your principles.
That's when they say we go back to our original habits and
yeah. And you know, but to stay true to yourself. And I say, hold on to your principles LES and you hold on to your principles ALS, because words are really cheap. And I can say, we'll stand in front of you to protect you. We'll do all of this, but when they need you to protect them and you do it, that's a tick in the box. And it's about being consistent. And that's the same with behaviour management. It's consistency and it's about stability. We work with some children whose lives are very chaotic and some children need more help in that way. But I'm a firm believer that kids do love stability and do like to know their boundaries and are free to move in those boundaries. What we don't want is a bunch of robots. And I think sometimes that people who don't really understand what behaviour management is expect this bunch of robots. And we don't want a bunch of robots in the world, because actually I think what we want is we want to create people that think for themselves. But everybody, one of my favourite sayings in our trust is nobody marks their own homework, everyone's got a boss. And you are accountable. It's a really fascinating, and as children get older, you know, it's almost a funny system, isn't it? Because we know we know teenagers neurologically aren't really wired to get up in the morning. And then we send them to school at that time in the morning. And we do that. So I think what our education system is predicated on, I mean, the 6 weeks holidays is predicated on the fact we all needed to work on the land so the harvest would come in.
Okay, wow.
And I think it needs to be modified a bit, as I'm thinking. But I think this is a really exciting time to be in education.
What's your thoughts on excluding children?
Sometimes it's necessary. And we work really hard not to exclude.
Why?
Because we know the statistics, so we know what happens to children.
And what the pipeline.
Yeah, and we know where they're going. And we know that a lot of children who are excluded feel excluded anyway, and what we're doing is we're compounding that.
Yeah.
But so in the trust, we work hard not to exclude, but sometimes we have to exclude. And I think we have to be realistic. I had an interesting conversation the other day. So we had a group of year 11s who were verbally abusive to a member of staff and then were physically abusive to that member of staff. And they're 16.
Yeah.
So I had to take the really hard decision. Well, the principal took the really hard decision, but I backed them that we were going to permanently exclude those children for what they did. And if those children behave like that in McDonald's to an employee behind the counter at McDonald's, and McDonald's banned them from McDonald's or any other burger chain that's available, I think
we don't have that sponsorship yet.
I think public perception would actually be very different. And I think that that's a really thing. We need to talk about that, don't we? And actually say, well, why is it okay for them to behave like that at school to adults and it's not okay in McDonald's? And I think the perception that schools exclude too many children too quickly is often wrong. I think that a lot of work goes into helping children. I think, though, as a society, we haven't got enough alternatives for kids.
Alternative provision,
a different curriculum pathway.
Do you have an AP at GAT?
We don't have an AP at GAT. We use AP and we have internal APs in our academy. We don't have a single AP.
So what's your thoughts on alternative provision? Because there's a lot of private APs earning a lot of money and they do not care about the outcomes of the students. But
I think we underuse AP. I think the fascination with EBAC isn't right for every child. I can understand how some children become quite frustrated. We took over a school that had very badly lost its way with a very angry group of year 11 children who were forced to take a modern foreign language when they didn't want to take a modern foreign language. And if you look at places on the continent, Germany, for example, the technical college route, kids making choices at 14, and it's not about dumbing down. I hate the word vocational qualifications as if there's something that are second to A-levels or seen as second to that. And I understand how some children become very disenfranchised with school. And one of the things that we need to work on, I think, is the value of pathways. So we talk very much in our trust about the right pathway for the right child.
Yeah.
Now, unfortunately, since COVID, we have, in our trust and nationally, we've seen a rise in exclusions. But I don't think we've got enough specialist provision or special schools. We work in Skegness. In the whole of Skegness, there isn't a special school and there isn't alternative provision. Now, morally, in my opinion, and I'm not saying anything I haven't said to the local authority, the DFE, morally that's wrong, that children can't be educated in their own community because they have a specific need. But then I was talking to a mum of a year one boy in one of our academies who isn't getting anything from mainstream. He's severely autistic, he finds it very hard to communicate, but his option is to be bused, transported 45 minutes away. He's 6. And mum's saying to me, I don't want him. And I get that, and I think we need to really look at SEND. There's no question, in my opinion, that we've got too many children in mainstream who need to access specialist provision, but the specialist provision isn't there.
And it's not just based on behaviour either.
No, it's a whole range of cognitive learning needs.
Which isn't looked at either, is it? It's just normally behaviour.
And we're asking, children are like atoms, and so if you think about it, when you heat atoms up, they bang into each other and collide in a small space. And I think we've got some children in this country that are just in the wrong space. And it's heartbreaking when you think about some of our very young children, the little boy I've just mentioned, and he hasn't got specialist provision that he needs.
Why is the CEO of a massive trust talking to just one parent of a school?
It's really important to me. It's really important.
I'm not saying I believe that, by the way.
No.
I was playing devil's.
No, it's true. Because basically, sometimes I need to protect my principals because they're doing a great job, and I visit all the schools on a regular basis, and my job essentially is to go in and wind the kids up and walk out, which I love doing, and be available for parents if they want to talk to me. Parents have my emails. Parents will email me, and they're entitled to email me because I serve them. Yeah. And sometimes they'll email me with complaints, and I'll go back and say, I can't solve that, but I can pass you on to this person. But I'm very open about my emails, and ultimately, some parents feel that the only person that can make things move is me. That's not always true. And I don't get involved in complaints where it's not appropriate, but it was appropriate for me to support the principal by talking to a parent who actually is a lovely parent who has nowhere to go. My boy is 7. I wouldn't want my little boy in a taxi for 45 minutes being bussed out. I think we've got a huge discussion to make around SEND.
And that resonates a lot with me. And Dave would have seen, actually, my son is in year 1 who's got a few challenges at the moment. And I just can't see him staying in primary school at the moment. So it's just like, unless something's done, and the wife's calling me crying, and I'm like, oh, do you know what I mean? So I get emotional talking about it now, and it is really important. And I think it's even more important to understand as teachers, as CEOs, the impact that you guys actually have, and even just you taking a moment to talk to the parents. It's just about being heard as well, isn't it? Even if you say there's not a solution at the moment, but just listening and understanding is sometimes a game changer.
And that goes back to the 2 ears, 1 mouth. And also, every child is unique. Every child is precious to the parent. And I got a really early view when I was in NQT, ACTs now as they're called. I wrote.
When was that, back in the 60s?
Yeah, 1660s. I did like you. I remember writing this report about this very challenging kid in my school, in my class, and the deputy head came back to me and said, "You do realise this is someone's baby that you're talking about?"
Wow.
My name is Sian Lord, and I help deliver the Girls Growth Programme, a programme that helps deliver impact for teenage girls, ensuring that they're happier and healthier on their school journey, with a big focus on relationships, friendships, body image, self-esteem, mental health and mindset.
I'm Natalie. I'm one of the leaders for our Girls Growth Programme, where we discuss important issues such as self-esteem, diet, exercise and confidence. Think of 3 unhealthy habits that you have for yourself at this moment in time. And when you don't get enough sleep, it's harder to regulate your emotions, and small problems can seem much bigger than they are. Exercise isn't just about looking good or staying fit, it's vital for your mental health.
So get in touch today to get the support that your girls need now.
And that was a really powerful message for me to take a step back and think, yes, gosh. And what's great about being a teacher is that you understand teacher talk. So when my little boy went into reception, his teacher said he's very enthusiastic on the carpet, which means he doesn't listen.
Yeah.
And it's kind of how, because you are talking about somebody's baby, the vast majority of parents know their kids really well, don't they? And I think it's really hard sometimes. We're fortunate to have 3, soon to be 4 special schools in our trust, and I'm in awe of some of the parents, some of the challenges their children have and how resilient they are. But that's another system that we need to look at. Social care, adult social care. Social work is such a hard job. Social workers have a really hard job. There's not enough of them. They're stretched. And the whole fabric of support. And what I've noticed I did start teaching in 1996, I'll put that in. From 1996 to here, the kind of services that have gone down, speech and language across the country is a huge issue.
We met with Sam Strickland earlier today, and he said the exact same. He said there's just limited resources, and experts said back in the day you could pull from everywhere, and it's surprising to hear that, to be fair.
Well, we're in the middle of a perfect storm at the moment because we've got greater need, not just because of the pandemic, and I think people sometimes use the pandemic, it was getting worse before the pandemic.
Yeah.
We've got greater need, but we've got less money. So I used to say to people in our trust, we've got to be twice as good for half the cost. We've now got to be 4 times as good for a quarter of the cost.
Why is there less money? Just
in the system, in real terms, budgets are really difficult for schools to manage at the moment, and I understand the entire country is in that situation. But it is the demands on schools.
Surely that has to change, though.
I'm hoping it will. But the demands on school and the understanding, if we get it right in the early years, in those formative years, and I don't know whether I was a big fan of children's centres. And of course the demise of children's centres, and there was a big study done which makes me smile that anyone would need to do a big study into this. There was a correlation between children that had visited children's centres at a very early age and their performance at GCSE against children that didn't visit children's centres against performance at GCSE.
What's children's centres?
So children's centres were set up in the day that were in communities where there would be health visitors, there would be play groups, there would be interaction.
Okay.
And obviously the demise of those through austerity, we can now see a legacy of there. And I'm firmly of the belief, you're a parent, I'm a parent, it's a really hard job. There's no handbook, there's no manual, comes full of guilt, doesn't it, all the time. And I think parents do the best job they know how to do. And sometimes we all need support.
Yeah.
And I think that...
Even the CEO from the trust.
Of course you do.
Even myself, I work with teenagers every day on well-being, mindset and performance, but then does my 10-year-old daughter listen to me? Absolutely not. She rolls her eyes, stamps up the stairs. I get shirty with her quickly, and then I think, I'm supposed to be a professional with this stuff. I literally work with parents, and here I am.
I remember in lockdown, my daughter was in year 5, and I thought, I've taught a class of year 5s, why can't I teach you? Like, you know, I wasn't that bad as a teacher, but I really am. And I also think that, you know, as a society, we can be very quick to judge some parents.
Yeah. And throw stones in glass houses, you know, that's like we all do, I think.
And I think, you know, just like parents and just like teachers, I've never met a teacher yet who's got out of bed in the morning and thought, what's the pinnacle of rubbishness I can reach today? How bad can I be? You know, everyone's trying really, really hard. And I think what we're also living in a world now is where people are very quick to blame and look for a scapegoat. And I think, you know, the rise of like social media, and it's very easy to make comments on social media that you wouldn't make to people's faces. And then the kids,
you can get away with it too.
Yeah, and the kids, you will see this, won't you? You know, and it perpetuates. But I think there's a room in this system for everybody. I just think we've got some really serious reforms to do. I think SEND reform, social care reform is crucial. Wider support for families, and also some kind of way that we can seriously look at the curriculum to understand which pathways are the best for individual children without being accused of dumbing down, and just putting those kids on the right pathways.
What's Wayne's biggest insecurities?
Oh, where do we begin? I spend my life with imposter syndrome. So, for example, last week I was at a university speaking to a pro-vice chancellor, and the imposter syndrome was huge. And so I go through, you know, the spells of being very insecure about my performance. I beat myself up, so I'll leave you tonight and I'll drive home, and I've got about an hour and a half to drive home. And in that hour and a half, I would have played over everything I've said to you. And I would have played over everything I've said to all the heads I've been with today and all the kids, and that imposter syndrome. But I also think it's really healthy in a way if you can manage it. But there are times when I'm in a room still with other CEOs or last week at the university where I go back to being that 11-year-old kid that couldn't read.
Yeah.
And I don't think that ever leaves you.
No, it doesn't. Interesting. Quickly, why not disadvantaged students? So, as you know, majority of my work is running programs of pupil premium. I don't think I ever use disadvantaged students. And I've never really worked out another word to use until I met you today. Why do you not use that term?
Because they're not disadvantaged. They're underserved.
Underserved.
Yeah, and I believe that actually in our trust, I think our children that are identified for pupil premium, we've got eyes on them, we know what we're doing with them. There's a whole group of kids nationally, and certainly in our trust, that I call JAM kids, just about managing families. You know, I don't think the general public know that it's £7,400 as a cut-off for free school meals, so it's a very low income. But we've got a group of families that are in between that, that where mum might work nights and dad, and you know, and those kids aren't. And I think the word, you know, underserved by a range of people is a much better word than disadvantaged, actually. I mean, people have opinions on that, but I do think what we've got is, I met Baroness Barron when she was Education Minister, and she said, what are the two things I could do to really help at the moment? I said, the two things the government could look at for me is to give families with universal credit children free school meals. So that would make a huge difference to those families. And look at the impact that 0 hours contracts have, particularly on communities. So we live in, this Colby is a huge distribution centre. 0 hours contracts have a huge impact on families' universal credit and that stability of employment. And I just think it's fascinating. But
you really care about language, don't you?
Yeah, it's very important.
When you said about, not the swearing before the cameras was on, but it is about watching your language, like underserved instead of disadvantaged. Then you said there's no such thing as like a bad school. And what do you call a school?
Just lost its way.
Just lost its way.
Yeah.
And you keep coming back to that. That's a part of your vocabulary. That's a part of your philosophy. Why is watching your language really important?
Words stay with people forever, don't they? And labels stay with people forever. And I think it's fascinating because it's really the power, the impact of our words on people is so important. And I must remember, I used to go in Sheffield into schools that had lost their way and lead them for a small time. And the most powerful lesson I ever had was there was a huge corridor. There's about 12 classes down this corridor. And I was walking down this corridor to get to the teacher at the end to say something. And it was almost like a train rumbling. Wayne's in a bad mood, Wayne's in a bad mood, Wayne's in a bad mood. So by the time I got down to this teacher and opened the door, she's like, "What's wrong?" And I was, "Well, nothing's wrong." And someone said, "Well, they saw you walking down with a really serious face, and so your facial language, the language you use." And actually, I was thinking, did I say that I would pick my daughter up from nursery or not? And if I missed my daughter, it was nothing to do with school. It was that preoccupation. And you need to pick your language very carefully because sometimes we use words which we don't think will hurt people, and they do. And you know that old kind of like saying that we used to be told at my primary school, sticks and stones will break your bones, words will never hurt you. Words stay with you for a long time. And I think we have to be very careful about respect.
I think I know what you're going to say, but if you had a magic wand and you could fix just one thing today in education, what would it be?
SEND funding and SEND provision. That old idea of, I firmly believe, and people may very well disagree with me, and people do, that we have not got enough specialist provision for children in this country to meet the needs that they're currently showing us. And I think what that does is that creates a difficulty for the child entering into that classroom of 30, and also creates difficulty for the other children. And when we talk about inclusion, and I'm really proud of our trust because 21 inspections last year, and there's one word that stuck throughout all of those.
21 Ofsted inspections. And you've got how many schools?
37. We've got about 14 planned this year, because remember all the schools went into category at one time and had to come out of category, so we're in there. They say about inclusion, that inclusion was really important to us, but inclusion's got to be for every single child. And sometimes, you know, there are kids that go missing. My first head teacher that I worked for, that I told you about, had a great influence on me. Every Friday lunchtime, he used to make you write the list of your class from memory. It's a really powerful exercise. And what he would say is that he would come and talk to the top 3 kids on your list, because it may have been for whatever reason, but it was normally the kids that were challenging. And he would say, you better speak to the bottom 5 kids on your list, because you couldn't remember them until the end. And always, every week, the bottom 5 kids on my list would be white British girls in this school who just simply got on. And I was stumbling in your head to remember the names. And it was a really powerful exercise of, I'll take the kids that are at the top of your list, because for whatever reason they must be high in your mind. You focus on those children. And I think that we've got some children who are quiet and get hidden and get lost as well.
Silent majority.
Yeah, just get on and do. And it's really interesting about doing every child, every academy, every day. We are doing right by every child, every academy, every day by excluding some children. Because we're doing right for that individual child who's not in the right setting, and the other children, and people aren't always honest about that.
No. If you could sit down with any 3 people, dead or alive, for an hour conversation, who would you sit down with, Wayne?
My dad.
Okay.
Miss him. It's been 14 years now.
14 years.
I miss him to this day. I'd be fascinated to sit down with Nelson Mandela.
Oh, quickly, your dad, why?
My dad?
What would you actually talk about?
I'd want to talk to him about my kids, because he'd never met my kids, but also talk about the lessons that I didn't spend enough time with my dad, and we knew he was dying of terminal cancer, and my mechanism was to work longer, because like a coward, I couldn't face it. So
That he was dying.
yeah.
Wow.
And so I regret that I didn't spend more time with him. So there's a big regret there. I'd love to speak to Nelson Mandela to show the strength. I heard his bodyguard speak. His bodyguard is on a kind of like a tour, and he tells the most wonderful story about when Nelson Mandela was made president or prime minister. I can't remember who he was.
Yeah.
On the top table, he had the prison guards who had kept him prisoner at his top table at his dinner, and that fascinating way of forgiveness. And the last person, and this is a bit off the wall, is Brian Clough, because I'm a massive Forest fan, and I'm fascinated to understand about what really made that man tick.
They're doing all right this year.
Brilliantly this year, so far.
So far, yeah, 6-7 games in.
Yeah, well, we take that. The season could end now when we're top 10.
Amazing. You got any inspirational quote? What's your favourite quote?
Favourite quote?
Just going off now, just you know, using your time.
It's fun to do the impossible, Walt Disney.
It's what?
It's fun to do the impossible.
It's fun to do the impossible. There you go. Where can people find you if they want to reach out to you? Where,
I'm on X. See, to that right. I call it Twitter. So I'm on X, and I would answer any DM or you know, just come and have a conversation.
Like what I did to you. I mean, cool. You up for an interview? No.
Of course I am.
Amazing.
Because you've done great work in our schools, and it's a pleasure for me to meet you.
And it's amazing. I always remember I was in one of your schools local to here, and you knew I was in, and you was extremely busy one day, but you still had literally just came in for 5 minutes just to come in, shake my hand, say thank you for being here, and then you left. But even that alone, once again, it's those first, because we've spoken before online, but you just came in to make a point when in reality it was easy to come in a hall that day and do that, but it was also easy not to do that, right? It was easy just to be like, well, it is what it is. So I won't ever forget that. But also thank you for your time today.
No, you're welcome. Thank you for coming and seeing us.
There you have it, guys. Another episode of the School Podcast. Please like, comment, subscribe, do all the good stuff, and I will see you on the next episode. Bye-bye.